My name is Joseph Spielberg. I'm the Associate Director of Education at CAPE, Chicago Arts Partnerships in Education. And we have been holding these public dialogue series throughout the period of closures, school closures, and pandemic times to support teachers, artists, other educators, and the public at large who are interested in these topics. We feel that these dialogues, can everybody hear me? I heard some of the, okay. We feel this is a part of our mission to engage publicly about our work and our learnings, and to be in dialogue with both teachers and artists within the CAPE network, but also outside of the CAPE network. So we're very excited to have guests and our very own CAPE teachers and artists with us today. A couple public service announcements before we start. I want to plug our network forum page, which is capechicago.tumblr.com. If one of the CAPE staffers can type this in while I'm chatting, please do use the CAPE network forum as a research for yourself or colleagues. There's a lot of great work on there. I encourage you to check it out to see what teachers and artists have been doing for the past 5 months. And in addition to curriculum samples, there's a lot of reflective pieces and essays from teachers and artists kind of thinking through this as a network. So we really encourage everybody to go check that out. And also I wanted to let you know that in a few weeks, the week of September 14th, we will be having another one of these CAPE Presents events, and the topic will be on social emotional learning and trauma-informed practices in education and arts. And that will be hosted by CAPE's other Associate Director of Education, Mark Diaz, who's with us today. Hi, Mark. And will be more information coming out about that soon. So look for that, and I hope you can join us for that as well. Okay, without much further ado, I just want to introduce our presenters very briefly. I'm not going to go and read everybody's full bio, but I excited to have the group that we have. Our first group will be Jessica Mueller and Mara Flores. Jessica is an interdisciplinary artist with many years in Chicago as a teaching artist and former CAPE staff members in Chicago. Will have their, they've been working as partners in a CAPE program for the past year and a half. And then we will have Ricarose Roque, who is a researcher and assistant professor from the University of Colorado Boulder. And Ricarose has also developed programming and research around family learning there in Colorado, and we're excited to hear her present. Then we'll have Aram Atamian and Leticia Ramos, who are also CAPE teacher artist partners. Aram is multidisciplinary artist, and he is bringing a background of performance arts, as well as other visual art mediums. And Leticia is many years kindergarten teacher, and the two of them have really developed some interesting practices in this past 5 months of how to adapt to the current scenario. And finally, we'll have Gigi Yu, who is a longtime CAPE friend, colleague, and long distance pen pal. Gigi worked with Scott Sycamore from CAPE, collaborated in different ways with CAPE many years ago, but now is, and for many years has been at the University of New Mexico as associate professor there. And she's going to share with us some of the things that she's been working on with teacher training and insights she's hearing from the community there. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this off to our first presenter, who is presenters Mara and Jessica. Thank you all so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Joey. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, CAPE. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and set a timer to try to stay on time here. Just a quick note before we get started about our slideshow. You're going to see many images that are all from our summer classes woven together, which consists of one parent class, one youth class, which is ages 3 to 10, and one teen class, which is 11 and up. We also mixed in a few images that are from our prior classes, just to provide a little more context, because although this is about the summer program, this program has been going on far longer than just the summer. So the slideshow is going to loop while we speak, and please feel free to just focus on the images while we talk. Okay. So we're going to start by talking about family as resource, but first, to better understand what evolved this summer, it's important to include the background that CAPE has actually been building this partnership with the women at TSEP for the past 6 years. We spent the past spring having conversations centered around the pandemic, of course, and the Black Lives Matters movement. All of this directly informed our approach to the summer's remote learning classes. Our inquiry questions all focused on ideas about ecosystems. So things like, what is your home ecosystem? What is your community ecosystem? How are ecosystems political? Can we rethink our perception of our ecosystem? And can we design our own ecosystem?
Another element that recurred in the class was that parents want to do the best according to the values in which they were formed. But these values vary according to each culture and context.
So sometimes it's something as simple as an image or a prompt that reveals this very thing. In a conversation with the teens about the variety of types and colors of corn, the teens were really surprised that there were even different kinds. Well, Fatima, whose mother is a member of TSEP's food cooperative La Flores, a co-op that focuses on cooking healthy traditional Mexican food, recalled that her mom makes blue tortillas all the time. They all started asking their moms if they knew that this was even a thing, and if they did, why didn't they ever tell them? We asked them to keep this conversation going with their parents and to even try to make blue tortillas together. So in another class, Mara shared a video about street art in Mexico and recounted her experience with her cousin and her brother and graffiti in her youth. She described the experiences that she had with the cultural violence against women there. Patty Sitlali's mom, who's also in our parent class, shared that she and Sitlali watched the video multiple times together, and they were so interested in Mara's experience that they just kept asking questions for almost the entire class.
That it was very special because we wanted to start the conversation with the teens about how other young people are dealing with stress caused by living in violent environments. And we know that parents are really concerned about it. So I shared my experience as a teenager growing up very close to the most violent region for young women in Mexico, and how my cousin, my brother, and I used to use art to release some of this stress, even when we didn't attend any art classes because we didn't have those resources available. And I have to say that this was like 15 years ago. So it was more like intuitive. We had our own gang name, and we did a graffiti in our notebooks. We recorded some songs. So I shared this with the teenagers, used to encourage this conversation and to analyze the similarities of growing up in the surroundings of big and complex cities. And another, I think I want to talk about is how is it to build trust and long-term relationships? I think it's about finding a real connection with the community. I think also it's a very sensitive web, and that takes a lot of years to build. As in this case, Jessica has been working with this community for at least 6 years. And I want to share an example of that with one of the moms. In one of the classes, she wanted to share a story about a plant, and we started to talk about the plant, and then suddenly she started to cry because she said that she barely remembered the shape of the plant. So I totally understood that, because in fact I said, well, I have felt the same, but with another thing, with the recipe of mole. Because when I was a child, I used to do mole with my family and with my grandma in particular. But nowadays, because of this fast life and this fast style in which I'm probably in, I stopped doing that. So for me, it has been very like helpful to recover those recipes and to recover those activities. So I think in this case, it's just us being friends to them, really like honest friends. And I think they perceive Cape as a really honest friends too.
So a key element to how Mara and I think about like designing the classes is making sure everyone's invested in the material choice, but also in like the topics that we discuss. So all of that is driven by like a combination of what all of the participants are interested in, as well as what we're interested in.
Yes, and because we were talking about racism and violence and discrimination, I decided to center the conversations to different ways in which we might be oppressed, especially as vulnerable communities. So we analyzed videos that talked about inequalities around garbage, around the production of food, inequalities for women, or other communities like indigenous people, particularly in Latin America, and also how in these communities they are not allowed to use their own language, and how that can be some type of oppression too.
So during our first sessions over the summer, we asked everybody like a million questions about what mediums they were interested in learning. For the parents, they were really interested in going back to the basics. Even for those who've been drawing and painting forever, they were really craving like going back to the fundamentals. So that's what we did. The younger kids wanted to paint and use clay and markers, so that's what we did. The teens wanted to learn stencil making, how to work with markers, color pencils, and watercolor, so that's what we did.
One interesting thing here was that, for example, one of the moms, she didn't take art class before of this class. So when she received the bag with the materials, she was just reviewing each material in it and asking what was the purpose of each one of those items, because she didn't know how to use them. So it was really interesting.
So also overcoming technology challenges was like a huge key to this whole summer experience. This required a balance of one of us managing classes while the other one worked on the sidelines with parents to troubleshoot getting logged in and online. There were lots of technical difficulties. Our class had a micro way of addressing the technology accessibility disparity through teaching parents on a one-on-one basis, which really was like the only way that it was going to work.
Another interesting fact was, for example, one of the students she is almost over 70 years old, and she wanted to be in the class, and she's really an amazing student, but she got a lot of trouble entering to the class, and sometimes she couldn't enter, but she was there trying to enter the class for more than half an hour. And that was really like surprising that she didn't give up. She was just there until she could enter to the class.
So this required a lot of time and patience on everyone's part, but now everyone is able to participate. And I think everyone feels comfortable asking for that one-on-one help when they need it. Another silver lining to remote learning was cross-family learning. Participants were recruiting and encouraging their own family members to join, which unfolded over the first few weeks.
For example, so we started the class, the kids class with one of the moms. In fact, in the first class, she was alone taking the class because her daughters were still sleeping. And then in the next week, she recruited her teenager. And yeah, I think that's all.
So Maru began with her 3-year-old and 8-year-old, then she added her teen son, and then she eventually even added her elderly mother. Patty, who started with just herself in the parent class, then added one teen, and then another teen, and then her extended family, her nieces and nephews. By the end of the program, almost her entire family was involved. She also shared with us her excitement over her teen son, Leo, opening up artistically and emotionally over the course of the 5 weeks, more than he ever has, partially due to the calmer, more individualized environment. And then that also combined with working alongside his sister.
The other part of this story is very special because Patty has a very established position about herself making art. She expressed that she doesn't like her own paintings and drawings, but she is always there in the conversations, very active. And the thing is that one day she received her nephews at home, and she had all of this material, and she didn't do all the homework that we were having in for the class, but she ended teaching art to her nephews. And she mentioned that it was very important for her nephews to have this close relationship with her because they missed the teachers, like being next to the teachers in the classroom. So she was like covering that part for the nephews. And so it was not only about teaching just the arts, it was just being together, doing something together, and that was special.
So as we see parents and even sometimes siblings becoming the proxy art teachers at home, this brings us back to the beginning of our presentation where we were thinking through family as resource. Marlene helping her little sister Litzy learn about nature by explaining how to draw insects, much like a teacher would if we were actually able to be there in person. Melanie, unaware that she was inspiring her little sisters who were subtly watching her fill up her sketchbook, or Eugenia constantly creating, fostering a household where art is practiced all around. As her adult son pursues life as an artist, actually, he encourages his mom by purchasing supplies for her so that she can make more of her own work. And then Patty, who took lessons and materials from our parent class. And although she isn't crazy about her own work, she took the creative license to lead her entire family and teach them in her own way.
And for the conclusions, there are a lot of circumstances that cross this process. It implies a whole change in the dynamic of how it is to take an online family class, in which there is no more this bi-directional movement of information between the student and the teacher. For example, one of the moms, Maru, who at the beginning adopted the typical posture of the parent letting her children to take the class on their own while she was doing housework. But the kids were not in the mood to take the class because they were still taking the having breakfast, sorry. So, or they were still sleeping sometimes. So she took the kids class, and in fact, she was very active, asking a lot of questions about the procedures of making the activities. So she could take them later with the children and with her mom, in fact, because she added her mom. And they found later a better time to do the activities together as family. This is just an example of how once parents discover all the richness of their own culture and the beauty in their own stories, that gives them the power to use their own techniques to overcome situations like the current one.
Thank you.
That's what
Thank you both
we
so
have.
much. That's wonderful. Great to see all those images too. If you feel free to leave them in the chat right away. And the same goes for our upcoming presenters as well. Please, if any just reactions or direct questions to them, feel free to throw those in there. And we're hoping that after all the presentations, we'll get to address all the questions in the chat. So please feel free to jump in there. Thank you, Mara and Jessica, again so much. And I think next we'll have Ricarose.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. I think it's this one. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, hi everyone, I am Ricarose Roque, and I'll be briefly sharing two projects with you today. One we were doing in earnest before the shutdown, and a new project that we've been doing during the shutdown. So this first project is called Family Creative Learning. It's a project we've been working on with various community-based organizations in Colorado and in the early part of the program in the Boston area. It's been about 8 years now. And it's a series of workshops where we invite whole families to create and learn together with new technologies, particularly creative technologies that allow them to code and engage in physical computing. And what I mean by using coding is using it as another material for creative expression. And we especially invite families that have limited access to resources and social support around technology. So this is, as you can tell, before the pandemic, because everyone's very intimately close together. And the workshops are a series, and they have 4 key parts that make them up. First, we eat. We always start with dinner together from a local restaurant. And it's a nice way for parents and kids to do something that they're familiar with, which is eating together, before they jump into something less familiar. And then we split the parents and the kids up briefly to allow the peers to get to know each other. So parents can get to know other parents and share stories and strategies and ask questions. The kids do their own activities that are related to the main activity during Make. And there we have them engage with tools like the Scratch programming language. It's a free programming environment that was made for kids to create all kinds of interactive media like games, stories, and animations. And we've also had them use the Makey Makey, which is a physical invention kit where you can turn almost any material into a physical interface into the computer. Families create stories based on their own family stories, or they create musical instruments out of kitchen utensils, things like that. And we always end the workshop sharing our projects. And it's a great opportunity for families to see what they all made and to ask questions. In the early workshops in the series, we actually have parents work on their own projects and the kids work on their own projects so they can see what they're each capable of and allow parents to have time with the tools themselves, because kids can be very enthusiastic. And so we really want parents to have their own time to work and express themselves. And we have all kinds of configurations of families that come. We work with different community-based organizations like libraries, community centers, schools, and the biggest age range was a great-grandmother who brought her great-granddaughter. She used to work with computers when they were the size of rooms, so that was really fun. This is, as I said, been going on for 8 years, and we try to adapt it to the different communities that we work with. And one thing that we've learned, and Mara and Jessica mentioned this earlier, just how important building relationships and trusts are. And so we often say this experience is as much about building relationships as it is about building projects. And every component of the experience is trying to support that. That's why we always start with eating together. We have the parents meet other parents and kids meet other kids to really support the cross-family interactions. When they're making, we ask them to work together as a family, and we encourage them to share their projects and stories. This is also a research project, and so we've also been trying to study the ways that families learn together, the different kinds of roles that parents take on to support their kids, and especially the ways that they start to see themselves differently in each other in computing. Like, as I mentioned before, we really, when we talk about code and physical computing, we really see it as a medium of expression, not coding for the sake of coding or learning about computers. It's really learning with computers and learning to express themselves with computers. And it's important for families to see that shift, that technology isn't something just to consume, but it's something that they can create with and shape, and it can be a normal family activity, not something just for elite engineers to be engaging with. We also try to create resources for educators to learn from the kind of ideas we've been developing over time. This is just a slide of one of the pages of the resource guide that we've created for educators. These are facilitation fundamentals. Our facilitators are local professionals or students, and some of them are really new to technology or new to working with families, but they're really interested in how they can support families to learn together. So these are some of our facilitation fundamentals. You'll see in the top right, building trust and relationships is one of our key facilitation practices. So that was before COVID, and since the start of the pandemic, we had to suspend those activities for now, and we're imagining new remote experiences with our community partners. In the meantime, though, we feel we really want to know what's going on with families right now and what they need and what they're going through. And so we've been working on an interview study to ask families how they're organizing learning at home. And we've been interviewing parents, especially from households with limited resources who are experiencing compounding challenges with the current pandemic. And we ask questions like, what does a typical day look like at home? What did they need to support their child to engage with school online? What do they want to see this fall? What kinds of activities do they do at home together? And I'll just share some early insights. We're still in the middle of these interviews. One key thing that really struck me was the context collapse that families are facing. So all these different settings like school, home, work were often physically different, but now they were all coming together at home, and parents were taking on different roles as all these contexts started coming together. And it was overwhelming, as many people know. Another thing that's been happening is the dissonance between home and school, or a mismatch of expectations from families and how online school translated at home. So sometimes parents might see that the assignment didn't really quite match their learning goals, or they thought there would be more time for synchronous activity, or if there was synchronous activity, it wasn't quite what they expected as well. So there's a kind of dissonance and miscommunication and like mismatch between what parents wanted and what was happening. Something that was great to see in our interviews was the really broad ways that families and parents were viewing learning and what it could look like at home. So they would take all these opportunities and choose them as times to learn together, which is something they were already doing beforehand. And really trying to highlight these as times where they can talk or point things out or imagine up new things to do together. And our interview is ongoing, but one thing that we're seeing that's really important moving forward is as we design experiences for families, is how important it is to talk to parents and to families about what's happening at home, what they need, and also to really build on the practices that they're doing, the kinds of activities, and really try to see that context collapse as both a challenge that they're trying to manage and they need resources around it, but it's also this opportunity to help create more resonance across those spaces, especially around school and home. So I thought I'd also end with some questions that we keep thinking about. One thing that's been really on my mind and many of my partners and team members is, what does equity look like right now? For example, now that everything's moved online, or many things have moved online, I know some spaces are bringing kids back. What does it look like as technology access or the quality of access is different across households? How can we think about that together with our partners? How can we invite families into that conversation? And how can we also use this time to continue to push ourselves further in imagining what equity could look like across our projects? So that's it. I look forward to continuing hearing about the other projects, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Ricarose. Wonderful. And again, I saw some comments as you were speaking. I encourage everybody to put any responses or questions you have for Ricarose as well. And I will introduce our next presenter, who is, it's Aram and Letty.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Aram, and I am a teaching artist with CAPE. And Letty and I have been working together since the beginning of the last school year, running the after-school photography program at Waters Elementary here in Chicago. And then we continued on through into the summer courses, a summer photography course that just ended recently. I'm just going to share my screen. Just bear with me 1 second.
Did you want me to introduce myself as well? My name is Leticia Ramos. I work at Waters Elementary in Chicago, and I have been at Waters for about 12 years now. I have been with CPS for 19, and I really love the CAPE organization. I started working with them since I arrived at Waters. They have a long history with Waters, and I think they collaborate really well with administration and staff and students. The programs have worked really well. We really enjoyed our program this summer that we did with the families and the students, so we can present that.
Yeah, so something that in the middle of our after school program with photography, we were mid-switch. So we kind of, while we were running that, we did this switch to remote learning. And so the really kind of silver lining was then we got to sort of start from square one almost right away with the summer program, which was really, really useful because we learned pretty quickly during our virtual after-school program that we had more access to family and also just being a photography class. The really incredible thing about that was when we were in the classroom, the students were pretty limited to where they could photograph. So we had to come up with different kinds of solutions to come up with new projects where when we were all remote, we found the students really had all this access to each of their individual worlds, and that really included families. So Letty and I really wanted to build our summer curriculum specifically around ancestry for a big part of it, and working with family as subject.
Yeah, so we didn't want, we knew that they were limited, and with COVID, they're limited to like their house and their surroundings, and we wanted to just include what is around them. What do they have accessible without having to go too far, without having to go out into the city with masks and so forth. So what was around them, we thought that just the families that were there that were listening in or participating or working from home, they can be part of what our projects were. So.
And we were really, really lucky to have a lot of amazing family engagement because we weren't really sure going into it how available family would be. And there's just a couple just to share some strategies that we had used to get people in was just with like kind of small asks. So just like, just join us, while we share our work, all the family is invited, and Letty would send out, emails inviting all the family like, week in advance. So that way there was always a space of time where they could just come and join and they were invited. And then as we got a sense that they were interested, then we started kind of bringing in these projects that we designed to include them. And we were really delighted that they all really showed up for that.
I think it was just really important to let them know ahead of time that we're going to be meeting and that they were welcome to join in on our class at a specific day and time. So they were ready, they were prepared, and most of the parents were just there, looking forward to it.
Yeah, and a really kind of another kind of side thing that came up through that was the students were then the ones sort of in charge of the collaboration. So you know, even if it was like the time where the family was supposed to join us and they were kind of not there, we all knew that they would be on the sidelines, so the students could just kind of run and bring them in, and so that ended up. So what we'd like to pretty much do next is share with you a couple of the projects that we did with our group, specifically around family collaboration, where they were always involved helping with other projects, but we kind of wanted to just highlight the projects that involve them directly. So first, one way that we did that was using family as subject. Having, as we said before, you know, having this access to the family and also the objects that the family, that have been with the family, and including photographs. So we did a project that comprised of kind of two mini projects, where finding the oldest photo in the house or the memory of a photo, having the student interview a family member about the photograph, take a photo of that during the interview, and then reenact it in whichever way they wish to. So I'll just go through a couple of these. This is one of our students, Katie, who's
she interviewed her grandmother, and then this was the grandmother that was at the farm, in the farmhouse. And then
here's a kind of a blurry photo of the one that she ended up choosing to reenact. And they all kind of used very, very different methods, where Katie's family really went for like the kind of dead-on black and white, down to the mustache here, and went for like a lot of, just to really capture this initial photograph through costume, really particularly.
Yeah, so you can tell the parents really got involved into making it look as close as possible to the old photo that they came up with from their grandparents, and they were able to get that story.
Yeah, and here's another one, Eugenio interviewing his family. And he took a very different approach. This is a photograph of his mother and her family.
Cousins.
And I believe it was the first time that they saw snow. So this was like a really important memory for her and in that family. And he chose to do it with no people. So and you can notice like the Christmas tree up here on the cabinet. And he really focused on the composition, and that's one thing that we were really going through. And another, like a big idea was, even though it included ancestry, was ways of seeing, and just talking a lot about how we talk about images and how each of our points of view are so different, and really clarifying them, and how having that multitude of perspectives really highlights how we make work and how we talk about it. So here you see it side by side, there's the tree. And then this was great. Oscar and Zoe were brother and sister, and they had some incredible interviews. So this is Oscar's notes that he took during his interview about this family photograph here. And then
so this is Oscar's grandfather over on the left, and then they needed to recreate that photo.
And so this was his reenactment. So this is another different strategy, and you know, an enormous stuffed animal. It's actually, you know, about that size, but so this was really fun. So they actually did a pretty amazing job.
And they were able to use their imagination and recreate that photo, which was a lot of fun for lots of the families.
Yeah, and this is when Letty and I had this decided to just have these work sharings with the family. So after we would involve the family in a project like this, we would show everybody's work, and invite the family to join. So what we ended up having was these amazing Zoom calls where the families were presenting the work, and each family member would kind of talk about the process, and we would figure out who led the project. In some cases, one of the parents got really inspired, but in many cases, the student would really lead. And that was really rewarding, both of our favorite parts of this summer. And then another thing one of our later projects was kind of beginning to work with inter-family collaboration, which is something that, having done this a little bit with this project, we really in the coming year want to work with this a little bit more remotely. And this involved writing. So another just objective of ours was to see where photography could intersect with other mediums, and writing was a big one. So we covered, haikus, and we had one student write a haiku. And then another student would take a photograph to illustrate it or to just inspired by it. And then their parent had to write another poem based on just that image without seeing the original one. So we had this kind of chain of
it was a process between like the student's haiku finding a way to image what a different student's haikus what. Like, so the student who wrote the haiku, then we switched it and gave it to somebody else to take a photo of what they imagined that haiku to be. So this is actually at the Waters Garden. If you go back, I'm sorry, Mr. Ray.
Right.
So Leighton wrote the haiku. It says, "It smells like flowers. The smell tickles my nose a lot. They look different." So then that haiku was assigned to Zoe, and then Zoe's brother or mom took a picture of them in the garden, and she was able to find a picture that she created a picture that kind of related to the haiku that the other student had written. And then we assigned it to the mom to just write a haiku based on that photo that they have taken. So then the mom wrote, "Sunny, warm, and sweet. She slips between each blossom, stealing all the suns." So it was really kind of just all interrelated with one another, which is great.
This is a very funny one. And in some cases there was here's some more really good ones. Let's see, one that I really love is this one where Zoe wrote this about a window washer that we later saw in a photograph of hers, that, by this huge building with this window washer that they would watch every day, kind of going really, really high up. And then another student took this photo, clearly on the ground, and then when his mother wrote the poem, there was a little bit of a critique in the poem where it's like, so many windows, beautiful, bright sunny day. Where's the ladder? So that's a favorite too. But so this was we were really inspired by this, how this ended up going and how much interest that we got from parents. And I know that a lot of that was luck, of course. I mean, I'm sure, but also I think these small kind of testing the waters, and also not feeling pressure for them because there's so much stress, having to parent and work and all that. That one thing that Letty and I always made sure to do was to kind of just always send over a recap of the class, so that even if they couldn't make it there, they would have that time to think about their capacity for being involved in the project or not. So, keeping it kind of low pressure that way. But
and I think it was fun for them, like having these different activities that we would schedule and getting them involved. And if they weren't available, like if they were out of town or whatnot, we would still send them the recording of that session so that they can see what they had missed and decide if they wanted to catch up or take their own photos. So it was a really fun project for not just the kids, but the kids getting the parents involved, because that's who they were all stuck at home with during this pandemic. They're there and they have their family, so they're making them part of it. So it was really fun for the parents as well. And I think, like Mr. A said, it was important to let them know ahead of time that we're going to be working on this, so that they have something to look forward to for the following week.
Yeah. And just, I guess to wrap it up, I mean, in this coming semester,
School year.
School year, we'd really like to kind of continue that and kind of see how far we can go with this, getting families and their own narratives involved in collaboration. So we're really looking forward to that. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aram and Letty. It is, I think, both with all these, it's really nice to see like so much joy. It's just really refreshing. So bravo. And there's some questions for you coming here too. Please, there's some responses. Please also send questions to them, and we will have a good amount of time for discussion after our last presentation, which is GGU.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Great. I hope you can see it. I'm GGU, and I'm participating from the University of New Mexico here in Albuquerque. I'm really excited to be here today with all of you. This is kind of a nice reconnection for me. As Joseph mentioned, I have strong ties to CAPE. I lived and worked in Chicago over 10 years ago and participated as a researcher and a professional development provider within the CAPE network. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that history first. So I think Scott Sycamore should recognize these images. This was actually during the time I was in Chicago. I was working as a studio coordinator for an organization called Chicago Commons. And during this time, I worked with Scott. We created a study of artist studios within these two different neighborhoods of West Hempel Park and the Pilsen neighborhood. And this study was actually kind of a seed for me in being interested in what is a studio, what does it mean? As it was for the children as well. I think through the study, they started to see this idea of studios as something that was not so distant from them or their lives, and that really could be a part of their lives as well. So since moving to the Southwest in 2010, I carried this idea of studios with me. And one of the things that I did was working in the public school systems here in Albuquerque. I worked with children and teachers exploring the concept of studios as places within the classrooms for interdisciplinary thinking and learning. We often brought in natural materials and materials from the community and added them to the studios as a way to create connections with the outside world. Families often participated alongside children within the studio spaces for creating with the children. Currently, I'm a teacher educator in the art education program at the University of New Mexico, and I work with art education and elementary and early childhood pre-service teachers. As a part of my research, I continue to draw inspiration from the studio as a place for collaborative researching with art media and processes. I facilitate professional development experiences alongside Christy Kalunga at the Paradise Valley Community College, which is in Phoenix. Several years ago, we created a group called the Collaborative Educators Institute, or the CEI, which is a group of early childhood educators representing diverse programs in Northern Phoenix. The diversity of the group of educators lends itself to these really rich experiences that we have with exploring different kinds of artistic art media and processes as pathways of teaching and learning. And through these processes, the teachers think about how to engage similarly with children in their classrooms. So every summer we organize something called the Summer Studios. And ironically, I work with someone from Chicago through this project as well. His name is Jesus Oviedo, who also works now at Chicago Commons and is an artist here in Chicago. And we create these summer studios as opportunities to engage with these really contemporary ways of thinking about art making, including making installation art, and they're very collaborative as well. So every summer we look forward to these summer studios. However, this year things were quite different since we couldn't be together in person. So I'm going to talk more about the summer studios in a minute, but first I'm just going to give you a little more context to where it is that I'm located. So here in the Southwest, it's a very rich in culture and beauty. There are 23 Indian tribes located in New Mexico alone. And of course, during this presentation, I want to respect those and the indigenous people who have lived here before I have, many thousands of years before many of us, and acknowledge the deep learning these places hold and have held for thousands of years. The Southwest, including New Mexico and Arizona, while rich in this beauty and culture, also faces many deficits in regards to healthcare and our educational systems. In New Mexico, we're often 50th in the nation when it comes to child well-being and education. Arizona faces similar struggles in regards to poverty, inequities, and resources in education. So when the quarantine first happened, I was really struck by how we responded to the quarantine here in the Southwest by asking families and children, even teachers of very, very young children, to spend several hours of extensive periods of time online. And I wondered if this was the appropriate way to respond. The pandemic revealed many cracks in our educational systems that were always there, but because of the pandemic became even more visible. The first is the lack of resources for families regarding technology. Many families and even my university students didn't have access to devices or the internet. Some families were very large in size and they were being asked to provide technology support for many children at one time. And the second crack that I think was revealed was this role of the families in learning. And did we actually consider them before the pandemic as an integral part of our educational systems? Is the home an integral part of our educational system? So I wondered about these ideas and how we could create this culture of listening during this time, this pause that we're having, listening to children, listening to families, but also listening to the environment, both the indoor environment and also the outdoor environment as places for creating learning opportunities. So this year for the summer studios, my colleagues and I met and we realized that we needed the studios to be virtual and also that we had no way to distribute art materials to the homes of the participating educators. So we wondered how educators could continue to engage with art materials and processes within their homes. And we also wondered how the concept of the studio as a state of mind and a place of research could exist within these home environments as well. Learning with materials, this would be an opportunity for teachers to consider the materials that people have at home, how they could also think about to consider this for what they might do with children and families. During the summer studio sessions, we met daily for 4 weeks through Zoom. And then during these sessions, we would share presentations, and then we give something called like a provocation or a challenge for teachers, for the participants to try within their own environment. Then they would photograph their work and upload them to Google Classroom. So each day we would go and we would look back at what people were contributing and share with each other to see where the things that people were discovering in their homes. So for our first session, we challenged participants to search within their environments for objects that caught their eye, and perhaps when looked at closely, they could be seen in a new way. We were struck by the connections and also in the differences of the images that were shared. So some were very personal, like their children's bedrooms or nature, pets, lots of different interesting things. Sometimes we shared, during the presentations, we would share artists' works as inspiration. For the next session, we studied the artist N.S. Harsha as he searched for one color, the color of red, as he created connections in his walk through a busy Indian market. Similarly, we asked the participants to observe and search through their homes for one color that held meaning for them. And it was during this experience when the participants shared their images back that we noticed that they were actually creating with their family members. They were not just doing this on their own. So here's some of the images that they shared with one color. And here's some more things that were outside. Someone captured their dogs as black and white, which I thought was kind of creative, and other natural objects. And then this piece in particular, this teacher responded that was a collaborative work she said, by myself and 3 daughters. Pieces of all of us are reflected in what we chose, and they are all in shades of my favorite color, green. We named it Female Family Portrait in Green. This was so much fun. I wonder if I can make them put all the things back if I promise lime sherbet. We also challenged the participants to look through their kitchen cabinets for things that they might use to create paint, to create color. And they found things such as spices, blueberries, spinach, and coffee. One participant, the painting on the swirls of beautiful yellows, the participant described this work as something she created with the spice turmeric. I imagined Palo Verde blossoms of all these homebound months wafting through the air and sticking to my painting. A henna hoop of flowers, a daisy chain of yellow turmeric. My colleague, Jesus Oviedo, he started to think about the word texture with the participants. And he invited them to look just within their immediate environment for things that held texture that could also produce sound. So they created a live, we created a live performance of the textures within our environments. Then participants were invited to look within their homes for things that had texture and to make marks with them. In this example, you can see there's a baby that someone used actually their baby's diaper. I think the baby was part of the mark making process. Different kinds of rocks. Someone found tires with textures. So this kind of opened up a whole new world of the textures that live within our environment. During the last session, participants combined the elements of meaningful objects, colors, and textures to create assemblages that told their stories of their interests. During summer studios, the home became the studio where ideas could be explored and the rich vibrancies of relational material experimentations with family members took place. What I learned during summer studios is how important family is to teachers as well. Teachers desire opportunities to create with their family members, and my hope is that these experiences and the feelings they developed while creating with their families will resonate as they re-enter the learning context with children. The pandemic has brought despair for many people throughout the world and has revealed the many cracks in our systems. However, I wonder how opening up the cracks can now allow for new growth. We have an opportunity to come out of this experience with new knowledge that could lead to different ways of working. One possibility is for a new perspective on home life that many of us have shared today, and the life of families as a more integral part of our learning systems. And that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gigi. This is really great, kind of full circle across all the presenters. And I mean, there's just so many places to start, but I think I'll maybe just start with somewhere where you left off. And if I could ask, maybe just to start the conversation, I'll go back to the first presenters, Jessica and Mara, and just pose a question. Then you guys all feel free to jump in after that, but I just want to kind of get some momentum going. Something that Gigi brought up, and actually Ricarose, you brought it up too, just about this idea of, you know, there's this opportunity that learning can look different now, and there's actually always been this potential for the home and the family to be a resource for learning. And I know you've experienced that over the past few months. So I wonder if what in that in your work resonates? Like, what are things that stand out to you in terms of like the family as a resource, or the home as a learning space, or a studio, as Gigi put it? I don't know if you have any reactions to that, just to kick it off.
I could start. So I think if everyone is willing to try and be open, kind of like anything is possible. So whether that's like the parents or the kids, or like I think a reoccurring theme in our presentation, all of our presentations, was like how by having the willingness to work together within families, people start the family members start viewing each other in different ways, and like different types of, not different types of relationships, but like their relationships that already exist maybe are like building out in like unexpected ways, which I think also connects to even something maybe as literal as like materials and things that have also been brought up across many of our presentations about materials, and how we've all had to like, you know, really be resourceful and like rethink our approach when we can't just take our big awesome Cape budget, you know, to Dick Blick and just give everyone exactly what we think they need. So like that same kind of like openness with those relationships developing, within like the resources of family relationships, like that same thing like transfers or translates into materials. And like Gigi's examples of like the different pigments in the house, like just in the kitchen. That was something that like Mara in our class just like touched on a tiny bit with making pigment out of like the liquid created from black beans. And just sharing something as simple as that, like I feel like our students' minds were kind of blown that like you could do that. And like I kind of was too. I didn't think of that myself. So just kind of that openness all around allows for so many things to happen.
I just want to add a little bit. It is very related to this last thing that Jessica said. For me, it's very special to realize that some of the parents, sometimes they say that they don't want to do it, but in fact, it is because they don't think they can do it. So for me, it is very special when they realize that in fact, they can do it and that they have the resources at home and in themselves, in all the knowledge that they have as an adults and all their own stories.
Absolutely. Aram, Letty, Ricarose, any other reactions or responses to this idea of like home as resource, home as learning space? Your thoughts on that or things you've been kicking around?
Yeah, I thought that that was one of our approaches. We said, let's use what you have already in your home without having to go purchase anything, without having to go on a hunt for materials. We just said, look around your garden, look around your home. We used definitely, like for our picture project, it was just like find one of the oldest photos that you have that you may not know who's in the photo or who's pictured. Also for photography, we did like a camera project where they just kind of had to find things around either in their home or right outside their home. It was like a scavenger hunt. We gave them like a list. We did give supplies. We supplied them with the disposable camera, and then with our program that has usually been used with digital cameras, it was really interesting for them to see that. Or they asked a lot of questions like, can I erase a photo that I didn't like, or I don't think it came out good? And you can't see that with the disposable camera. You don't know what those photos came out like. So you needed to just go with it. And we gave them specific items to photograph that they were on a search for. And then they recently, they had developed those photos and then they labeled what they were. I know now that the program's over, we even just had one student email today that he added his photos from last week to the folder. So just, it was really interesting. And then we had them explain their photos, and we had the parents also jump in and say, we took them to the cemetery to do these, or we took them to the park or the school nearby to find different things that were requested. But we didn't want them to have to spend money and go purchase anything. We just gave them disposable cameras. We also provided them with the awesome book called, what was it, Mr. A? Was it I See, or
it's a seeing things. It's
Seeing Things. It's
yeah,
an amazing book.
Photography book.
That had other photographers of how they see things, and it's just like a reminder of how other people see things in our world, that how we can look at them differently, and how we can take something that's right in front of us and it can have different views in the morning and the afternoon and at night, because like that was one of the activities that they needed to photograph the same item multiple times throughout the day and then look at the difference. So just trying to teach them to be more observant.
Yeah, and I think what you're hitting on, Letty, is just to go follow this train of thought, is how when you do start to view the home space and the physical resources and the kind of historical resources of the family, which might be this generation or more generations in the past,
right.
I think what your project's really exemplified, and I think this is happening in the other sharings today too, where by seeing the family in that frame, it's also opening up a space for inquiry, right, into what is, into the family space and the family story, and who was in this picture. It might have been a point of inquiry for the student even before this project, but you're kind of
And we
facilitating
did have parents.
that inquiry
Yeah.
space. Yeah.
And we did have the parents really let us, like they mentioned of how important it was to do this project because it really helped their child understand more about the people or the group of people that were in the photos. So it helped them a little bit understand how times were in the past and what they had to do and so forth. So the parents expressed their gratitude for having this activity.
Yeah, and Ricarose, I remember learning about the Family Creative Learning Initiative and the programs that you had done, and how you talk about, when in pre-COVID, with family dynamics, relationships between adults and children, and how those can shift in when they're working on a project together and they're sharing it and they're, in these settings. I don't know. I wonder about how that is exactly the same in the stay-at-home scenario, or does it change? Because you brought up this idea of context collapse too, how that can actually complicate things, but how projects can be designed to kind of embrace that collapse, if you will. I don't know if you have any thoughts or reactions on that.
Yeah, something we emphasize to the families and the facilitators who participate is that learning happens through relationships. And so that's why we invest so much in the design of the program to strengthen the relationships within families, across families, and also between the families and facilitators. In the current context at home, I think what's complicated in that context collapse is schools, especially for younger children, are relying on parents to be facilitators and help be tech support, compliance officer, timekeeper, like waker upper, and it's like all these roles that parents have to play and during the school year. And one dad in particular used compliance officer as an example that he had to play during the school year. But once the summer hit, he could resume this role that he had to, be this co-creator with his kids around the activities that they would do. And so, I think with the current context, parents are constantly having to shift their roles and sometimes taking on roles that they'd rather not. And it complicates their relationships with their kids because of that. It's not something that their kids might be used to seeing their parents play. Yeah.
I think Melissa had some questions. Mr. A, did you want to address that? I think Melissa had a good question on how did we come up with great ideas. Mr. A, I would have to give him the credit because we collaborated, but his ideas of what a photographer on the home were amazing. And then, go ahead, Mr. A. Aram, are you there? You're muted, sorry.
Rookie move, I'm sorry. No, it's yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, what happens when they're not willing to do so, which actually happened, a couple times where there's students who are either intimidated by something, and it's luckily with us, there was never both. So if a student was sort of a little bit shy about a particular project, the one I'm thinking of is partially also inspired by the fact that everyone's access to cameras is wildly different. A lot of our year was making cameras from scratch out of like home materials, which was really fun, but also I think for some of the younger ones a little bit intimidating, like turning the room, blacking out all the light in a big room to make a camera out of a room, camera obscura. So in that case, that was when it was really useful to meet with them like after class, like we would keep office hours, which actually I'm glad you brought this up because I wanted to mention that was really helpful.
Yeah.
Was we would have regular office hours. It was a different day than the parent day, so that if there were any questions on tech, including cameras or Google Drive, because we would be available for parents or students to stay. And that actually, I think, was really contributed to people like getting over the hump of being like, oh, I can't do this because there was more time. And we were always making ourselves available if there was another time to talk or go over a project, and being flexible with the parents around their time needs was something that I think helped if there was any resistance around around a project.
Yeah, it also helped to teach them how to use the drive and how to use the Google, how to, when they're creating documents, and how to upload them and share them into which folders. So I thought that at the beginning of the session, for both the parents if they had questions and for the students, it helped them feel less anxiety on sharing their projects, because then they were like, oh, now I know how to use the drive, I can show. So then they would stay, a lot of them take advantage of staying on after the class so that we can walk them through specifically. Now look at the top, you see the name of this folder, you're going to find that over on your left side. So we were very specific on how to access that and how to upload. And then depending on the cameras that they were using at home to take photographs, some were like the more fancy cameras that they needed to use the memory card and upload that. So then sometimes their parents would help them with uploading those photos onto the drive and then sharing them with us. So we did have a lot of students that needed that tech support, and I totally understand that. They were just thrown into this spring, and they didn't really know how to do that. So it was a big shift for us, because kind of also alleviated what we needed to do at the end of every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. We would take home the memory cards. We would teach them how to take out the memory cards out of our digital cameras, take them home, upload them, put them onto one file where we can share them with all of them. But teaching them how to use the drive from home, then they were kind of learning that responsibility on their own, and just figuring out how to use it, because that's going to be a great lesson for the students that are going back now for the fall. They're definitely going to be using that Google Drive. So
I would second that for sure, like that ability to provide like one-on-one guidance for parents and students for how to deal with technology was like huge. We had a lot of people who like don't even have an email account, so how are they supposed to get on Google Meet if they don't even have Google at all? And those are things I think many of us just assume are like a given that are happening. So that like I would just second that. And then also for us, like this thing about like what if they're not interested? That's why it was so important that we asked them from the beginning, like, what are you interested in? What do you want to do? What materials do you want to use? What do you already know a little bit about? What do you want to learn more about? And not to say that they could just like say like, this is exactly what I want, and then we're just going to follow exactly what they say. But that definitely gives us like a lot to work with in the thinking and the planning around, where we're going to take things. And then the last thing that I would add is like, one of the really wonderful things about working for CAPE is that we always have the ability to change course or correct course. So there's not that like added pressure of like, you said this was your plan on day one and like everyone hates it, but it was your plan, so you better keep going. We have that like ability to say like, okay, this really isn't working. Like, why isn't it working? Do they just need extra encouragement? Do they need like those one-on-one conversations, or some like maybe they just need a little support in this area? Or do we actually need to like change our plan or our curriculum? And that happens sometimes. And it's nice to like know that that's okay.
Yeah, and one thing came up the other day when we were discussing all of us, in regards to like family projects, that I remember, I forget now who said it, but it was such a useful point about when you're first involving family that choosing something, either asking or choosing something that involves them directly, where it's subject matter that is important to them, is the thing that can get them really engaged. And that seemed really to be a big difference between like, oh yeah, here's this other project, like please help with it, versus like, here's something that involves you directly. And that's, yeah, to just piggyback on that, yeah.
I just want to share a little bit. For me, the inspiration are the parents themselves and the stories that they always tell us. I think I really admire them a lot. And because I'm inspired, I always trying to find the best materials and resources for them. And I think it's like a cycle, because I can feel that from them, and then they can feel that from us. And if, for example, I were just trying things like randomly, I don't think that would work. I think for me, it is this really close relationship that we have developed with them that can communicate to each other on a very deeper way. So I think that's related.
So that's a good transition, because I was actually thinking along the same lines with something that came up across the presentations, and that was, you all said it slightly differently, but this idea of listening, Jessica and Mara, you guys asking them, what do you want to do? Ricarose, like right now, your whole work right now is around interviewing and asking questions to be informed about how to program, right? And Aram and Letty, you're asking them to tell their stories from their family, so this practice of listening as kind of a pedagogical practice. I guess maybe my question for the group would be, how do you, going into this fall, how are you going to listen and do and teach and create all at the same time? Like how do you start that off where you, you really want to engage the students actively, but you need to listen first. So I wonder, like, what are you seeing ahead of you in terms of that kind of practice?
A lot of planning meetings. Just thinking about like how the summer was too, like a lot of debriefing and planning and checking in. So, and again, the beauty of CAPE and having teaching partners, like having classroom teachers may not have, the luxury of having a second brain to think things through with, but we do. So, yeah, like you plan and then you have class and then you debrief and you plan more and then you have class again. And so it's like this ongoing cycle of like the conversation with the students, whoever's involved, and then the conversations with your partner and like combining your, interpretations or perspectives on what's happening to better inform like the next class. And then like maybe you have a trajectory for the semester or quarter or unit or whatever, but you are constantly kind of like checking in and adjusting and kerning and seeing if you're, on track.
I also think that one of the resources that we have are the text messaging chats and the WhatsApp chats. So in fact, one of the moms asked for having like a continuation of the class. And we said that we were going to continue sharing our photos, and we invited them to share their thoughts and photos and all the art that they are doing at home. And so I think that can be something that we could probably kind of talk to each other like in a call. Sometimes we do it, but it takes a long time. But we can have like a following up with the messages. I think that's a really good source. And we also probably have to pay more attention to those messages. Probably before this situation, when we only read the messages and just like that, and then continued. But now probably we have to be more careful on the way they are writing. And so probably we can find some details that can help us to use use it as materials and resources.
I'm not sure what schools in this fall are like in Chicago, but here in New Mexico, we learned that in Albuquerque, students are not going back to school at least until December. So, which is, that's major. And I think it's interesting to see how families are adapting to learning at home with their children. And it's just such a huge, it's so huge. It's so monumental that, kids are not even going, they're not going to the school, but they're going to be learning at home. So I know I don't really have any answers. I just think that we need to, as as a society, as a culture, to really create opportunities to have real listening sessions with families and what they need right now, because it's just such a major, it's so major. I know I'm at home, I have 3 kids at home. 2 of them were supposed to go to college and now they're not. So it's like, how do you manage all of this? I think is just something, how do we create more spaces for families to share what they need, and how can we support their needs as well?
Yeah, I want to come back to Arturo has a good question in the chat, but I just want to toss this back to Ricarose too. You brought up equity as a really big focus question for you. And I just wonder if there's any connection for you between this idea of listening and equity, like listening as a practice, and how that connects to equity, or for the whole group, but I wanted to start with you, Ricarose.
Yes, definitely. I think listening is a huge component there. And I really love how Gigi broke down these different channels of listening to children, to families, to the environment. The environment is something that I hadn't considered in the indoor and outdoor. And I definitely think that listening is a key part of that. That's why we felt really reticent to try remixing our program right away to a remote experience, and really wanted to talk to the families that we would be engaging about what's going on at home, because often our program has been in community sites, but we would be doing it within their home sites. And I also feel really inspired by the other sessions today and the way that they have been listening to families. And Gigi, what you're saying about the wonderful life of materials too, like there's also this listening around helping families to listen as well, is really great. And yeah, so I definitely think I'm curious about the ways that how people are facilitating that listening, both just like within your own teams, but also with the organizations that you work with, because that's something that we're trying to do with our different community partners right now, is like, how do we name our visions around equity with the current context, and how do we align and follow through on our commitments. So one of the things we're doing actually tomorrow is we're each going to bring in like an artifact that to us represents our vision of equity, and we're going to like use that as a way to discuss. Someone's going to bring like a spoken word poem. I'm going to share a story from the Family Creative Learning Program. And then later we were talking about having like monthly equity check-ins, like based on our visions that we name tomorrow, and how we decide to do that in practice. We're going to have these monthly check-ins about how are we meeting our commitments, or where are areas that we can improve, just because things are changing so much right now, and things that we thought we knew are just really up in the air. And again, emphasizing what we're learning in our interviews, that families are really overwhelmed right now, and parents are overwhelmed, and we want to kind of meet families where they are.
And I see Scott's response here. Much 20th century theory and practice literature starts from a premise of a divorce of home environments from school as regards to children's learning. when students start school full time. Sorry, Scott, I'm just reading this log thing. The whole focus is on the school as the only site of learning. If we could turn back the clock, earlier, look outside Western education. It isn't always that way. So when this pandemic ensues, do we throw it out again? Or when it ends, do we throw it out again? The home environments and relationships as a vehicle for children's education, or do we rethink the continuum of home and school and learning anew for this century we are in? Yes. So I don't know, Scott, if you wanted to riff off that, but yeah, I was thinking about that with also with Mara and Jessica and Letty and Aram's, your practice of having those tech check-ins is a very simple thing, but just the fact that you had this like specific way of connecting with parents outside of the class time, which I don't know, in my most experiences, I think is like once a year for parent-teacher conferences, not weekly. And that's just a different way of connecting the home and the school life that in that case is very technical, but in other cases of your projects is very built into the pedagogy. So, I mean, yeah, I think those are good questions. I don't want to miss Artur's question, and Jessica, I saw you responded to it, but this is a very specific question he's bringing up here. Did anybody have to deal with a family where someone got sick, and how do you handle it? And Jessica responded, none of our students became sick as far as we knew. They did know a few community members that passed away. We try to give them time and space to talk about how they felt whenever that was needed. You know, I think maybe just on the same, in the spirit of your question, Archer, is like I wanted to put to the group too, like how, if and how, you know, the kind of the trauma of the pandemic itself has come up, or how you've maybe even planned to talk about it if it came up, but also, you know, the other really pressing issue of the day, you know, that this really forefronting of police violence and the reactions to that through protests and actions in the streets. So I wonder if that is, if either of those have come up in a family context, or Ricarose, if that's come up in interviews, you know, kind of just the emotional toll of the scenario and how you've addressed that.
Yeah, we were fortunate to not have anyone get sick in our community that our students knew. We did allow them every day to do like a SEL kind of check-in, which I thought was really important for the students to just, we did a rose and a thorn activity every single day. And it was nice to hear what they were thinking, or what was fun, or what, you know, what they got to do, or what their thorn was. And it was even nicer to hear when they didn't have any thorn, like their thorn could have been that they woke up on the wrong side of bed, or they were hungry, they didn't get to eat breakfast, or whatever, but that they had a bad day. So just doing the SEL activity with them. And then we also did like a movement activity with them every single day. So we got them up and dancing or moving their arms, or just like kind of like it's cool. I think it's important that they get up and we're staring at a computer for 2 hours, and it's not, you know, okay for them just to sit there and stare. So like we have to find activities and different ways to get them interactive, and at the same time move their bodies and shake their hands and their head and their arms, and they were looking forward to it. If we wouldn't do it on one day, they would say, oh, we didn't do our movement today. So obviously they were fine with it. And it takes 30 seconds or, you know, 40 seconds to just help them get up and be part of what you're doing in the camera. And you can see them jumping around, you can see them, but also I thought it was important to do that SEL, daily check-in. And it's good for them just to talk. And then having that connection on a computer, some of these kids don't even know each other because we worked across different grade levels. So for them to connect and talk about, oh, you know, my mom burned the pancakes or something, whatever it was that helped us to bring each other a little closer and learn about them because if they don't know each other in school, then it's not like they're all going to be able to connect. I did feel that we had a very good group that worked well with each other, and they were respectful of each other's comments, and they're respectful of each other, whatever they had to share. You know, some of the students would bring in their family pet, the dog or the cat or whatever. So we would kind of joke around and say, oh yeah, this, your dog, whatever, what's his name, Jake, would be part of our session today because we're going to put him on our class roster because he would come to class every day with, you know, with one of the kids. So just making that connection where we want them to feel that they're part of something, and if they don't know each other, this is going to be an interesting year for the next school year, having students that may not have been in the same classes before, they may not know each other, having new students transfer schools. So checking in with them every day, just giving them a minute to share something good or bad or whatever is on their mind.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one weird side effect of the transition to, I think, remote learning, that, and I'm going off of Scott's comment too, is that for some reason it feels like a much more vulnerable place. The kind of online learning space, I feel like there's a lot more vulnerability there, and so I felt like finding ways to lean into that also meant that, like, I experienced that a lot of students were much braver about expressing their own opinions around each other's work or their own work, or, you know, talking about the work that each other were making than I really experienced in the classroom. And I think a lot of that, I believe, is due to the fact that, like, when we're all in our own home spaces and all meeting this way, it's a very distance, but there's more of a closeness and there's more vulnerability there, which I think in just these little things like check-ins or these, I love the idea that came up a couple times of having like more structured, like family check-ins. I love that. I think that really creates a feeling of closeness and a more bravery of sharing ideas too. That's the thing that I noticed.
I would say that also that feeling of like closeness and vulnerability like was almost like increased. Like, I don't know if we would have had it if we had only been remote. Like I feel like we needed like all the in-person stuff to make it successful, or to make it continue to have that build up of like the closeness and the vulnerability in this format. However, like when it was spring and like the pandemic was just starting, I think that's all we talked about for like at least 2 or 3 classes with the parents, with that parent class. And then when it felt like they were done needing to talk about it, and we made some work about it, we used our phones, you know, the cameras on our phones a lot too as a resource for that. And when it felt like that had like, you know, that was over, like then we were able to move on with that or from that. But then the protests had begun, and then also Talpochcali is in Little Village, which is where that like big warehouse building was destroyed right at the beginning of the shutdown, which created this like plume of like toxins in the air right as COVID was starting. So those 2 topics were huge. Racism, and then like internal racism, and like different forms of like the types of judgments that happen against each other in communities. Like that was a big topic. And they were very open. Like we would have like one parent say like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If you don't make it, I mean, that's because you didn't try hard enough. And then we have another parent come back with like, well, let me tell you my story. I actually had to like eat the scraps of like leftovers at the restaurant I worked at because I had to send money home, you know, and take care of my family. And like that person's willingness to be that vulnerable and exposed, I think was like a catalyst for that would like allow, you know, that other person or anyone else listening to maybe like rethink their perspective a little bit. And then they were also very open about like racism in the context of like when like the protests and riots were happening, and like there were, you know, Black Chicagoans who were saying like, I can't go, don't go to Little Village because you're going to get attacked by, you know, the Mexican community members. But then the conversations that our parents were hearing were actually lock all your windows because the Black people are coming, you know, and like we need to protect ourselves. So in this environment that we, you know, have with them and that trust that we have, we're able to just like actually talk about those things in like an open way and, you know, help kind of like work out why they think that way, where it's coming from, you know, like they were very open about saying like, oh yeah, actually I think maybe I was wrong, you know, maybe I should, you know, so yeah, so that was like a huge part of our class, I think, and like just responding to the moment. I think we all kind of felt like, how could you not talk about it and address it? And then and we did that a little bit with the teens because they were, you know, a little older and can handle some of these intense conversations. And you know, we talked a lot about like John Lewis when he passed. We were trying to pull in, you know, some like things as they were happening. But I also think that like the parents, those conversations with parents are huge because, you know, then they're taking some of that and they're reflecting it back in how they, you know, are within their family, how they're educating their family members or influencing them. And even the teens, like with their siblings, with their parents, like I have teenage kids and like, they're always, you know, testing me and pushing me. And I think I'm all open and like, you know, I know what's going on. And then they, they show me that I'm not, and challenge me. So yeah, but without that, like the trust and the vulnerability, I don't think those things would be possible.
So we have a little bit of time left. There's a couple other things that were brought up in the thread, you know, and I don't think Artur's, there was a direct answer for your question. So if anybody who's participating has also a response to Artur's who experienced that firsthand, that would be interesting to hear. But also if you wanted to, I have everybody on automatic mute. Oh, actually, I think I can change it. Anyway, just do like the raise your hand thing or a hand clap or something, or tell me in the chat and I can unmute you if there's something you want to express that's a little hard to type. We can open it up a little more now. Just wanted to put that out there too if anybody's interested. I also wanted to just read there was a kind of more of a comment in the thread from, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, Akit Dada, who said, you know, I'm a STEM teacher, educator, and I see how all these ideas and projects can be incorporated in a variety of fields. And I wonder about that too, you know, how the ideas from some of your work might translate to other areas. You know, I mean, there's a lot of different directions you could go in the future, but like keeping in the frame, you know, family learning and family involvement. I don't know, does that comment resonate for any of you?
Yes, for me, it resonates a lot. So this is my first time working with artists and arts in general. And before that, I have been working in conservation in Mexico. So now with this experience, I feel that I can use a lot of these resources to foster sustainability and conservation, especially, of course, in the Mexican community. Even it can be here or even in Mexico, and it can be, and thanks to the pandemic, I never thought before doing it like online or something, but it is something that for me resonates a lot. So I have like a whole window of a lot of thoughts and ideas that I can do for conservation.
One thing we also try to emphasize with our workshops include coding, which has that T in STEM, but we really try to emphasize the kind of cross-disciplinarity of the experience, that it isn't just about technology, but it's also about art, and they can also bring in science as if they want to explore particular phenomena with code or the materials that they're using. It's also, again, emphasizing that learning happens through relationships, and that really bringing in the kind of network of relationships around a young person, and how kind of in traditional spaces, I guess I put traditional quotes, the relationship might just be limited to student and teachers or between students. And here we really want to emphasize like this wider network of relationships. And I think that's what's really exciting about family learning in particular too.
Great.
This is a slightly related, but I've been in conversations, in a small group of conversations with some Indigenous women here in New Mexico about learning, some educators. And I'm going to just share in the chat a link to a blog that one of my colleagues wrote about Indigenous children during the time of the pandemic, and what learning looks like within the community of these Indigenous families, and how not, that this way of responding just through technology, just through computers, is not necessarily a way that what learning looks like within their communities. It's just it's a really beautiful piece, and I won't get too much into it, but if people are interested, I put the link to it in the chat. And I was very inspired by what Tricia Mokina was talking about in this work, and I think it's just something for us all to think about in regards to. I love this idea about relationships, but and also what learning looks like for different groups of people that we work with.
Yeah, one of the things that came out actually from some of the high school groups, not family-based projects, but with the high school students, they talked a lot about, especially the first couple months of online learning, about how a big purpose of the class was just to socialize, that the students could get together and chat and feel a little bit of normalcy around that. But I also was thinking about that, just the way that dialogue is a way of producing knowledge and sharing ideas. And, in the context of a family, it I think goes much deeper. And especially, if you're getting into like traditions of your family or your culture where dialogue is actually, a very well-seasoned way of passing knowledge. And in some ways, I wonder if it's, this is like, to Scott's quote too, like this disruption from our everyday is in a way getting to some older ways of knowledge acquisition, So I think that's a really good point. And I wonder too about the future, within this year, like how much that can be embraced within a large school system like Chicago, or, I know we have somebody from San Diego and New Mexico, these larger school systems, how there can still be space for this in the school day.
Well, that's the thing. I think you don't, again, I mentioned like when this ends. No one knows when this ends. Could end next year, could end 5 years from now. But why think of it all as just something temporary that you adjust to for a moment and then throw out everything that you learn from it when it's over? That to me seems, that is just way too capitalist, consumerist, wasteful. We should profit from our learning through the struggle that we've had. This is like an opportunity to reconnect with the home and family as its own kind of central force of learning that has largely been tossed out throughout the modern period. This link, I haven't read it yet really, but this link that Gigi just sent, when you look at this indigenous knowledge systems chart, way of life and survival, I mean, just look through this thing from early childhood, elementary, middle school, high school. I'm looking at like just charting the kind of learning that unfolds over time and age with being outside in that particular home environment. And the thought that we are, if we get some sort of vaccine or whatever, that we're going to now discount that again is not being valuable. I think we should fight against that. You know, right now, these centralized education authorities, Ricarose referred to this earlier, so often they just, you know, here we are, we're remote learning, and the only notion that a central office authority has is that the parent should be a compliance enforcer. We have to struggle against that. That is, it isn't, parents have many capacities and many possibilities, and that's true. But also there's a certain moral ethic dilemma to this. The notion, we want to build on parents' capacities, but it's also wrong to tell a parent that their only role is to make sure that your child complies with something that's an expectation from a centralized authority. That's wrong. It's wrong. It's just such an affront to the whole notion of family unit, whatever that unit is, however it's composed. If we value a family in society, whatever the nature of it, however it's composed, you don't then just say to them, okay, yeah, your only value is to enforce something that we have imposed upon you. That's morally, ethically, pedagogically wrong. And this is a chance through this unbelievable disequilibrium that we're going through. This is a chance to rethink that and remake it. So maybe the whole school day should change, even if this is cured. You know, maybe we should have a complete reconfiguration of what a school day is. But I don't know, but why not debate it and put some ideas forward? Yeah.
Yeah, and Teju's responding here, Scott. She said, I think in some ways parents will have to unlearn the education model that's been imposed, right? So it's like, yeah, how do you unlearn the things that are so ingrained and normalized to a point that they're usually not questioned? But here we're all forced to question it because there's nothing normal about the day-to-day.
But I think it's so we don't often even ask parents what their response to education. Like, how often do we ask parents, like, what does education mean to you? I think that's what Tricia Mokino is saying also, is like, is anyone even asking us as Indigenous people what education means for us within our community, within our homes? And I think first, this is an opportunity to ask that question. What does learning mean for you as a parent, as a family? What does education mean to you? And I think we might be surprised and also find very interesting what those responses are now, and especially now that they're seeing their children and what their children. My son is on the computer like 4 or 5 hours a day, you know, and he's at a pretty progressive school. So, I mean, I think we need to really stop and ask some questions about what is learning, you know, what does it mean, and asking parents that question.
This is maybe a little zooming in a little bit on the Cape front, the Cape community, but we had a PD recently talking about like rethinking, or maybe it wasn't a PD, maybe it was a meeting just to rethink what after school could be and should be, because like, do we want, do the parents want, do the kids want to just like be online for a few more hours after school because there's an after school program, or like, does that have to be something different too? So I was just really like inspired by and excited about the thought that someone in the meeting came up with about maybe the CAPE classes aren't necessarily like, okay, you have 2 hours of class time, like go for it, execute your 2 hours of class time online, because that's what we do now. And I believe, you know, I don't know if it was Joey or Scott, maybe the conversation developed into this, like maybe CAPE will think about restructuring, like how, like what is planning time and what is teaching time, and like encouraging experimenting with different ways of holding these after school spaces. So like maybe you meet online. This is not my idea. Someone else was coming up with this, but maybe everybody meets online for the first, you know, 10, 15 minutes of class to like, you know, have that group meeting, talk about what the plan is, the goals for the class for the day. And then you say like, okay, kids, like go, you know, go do your thing and we'll meet back here in 45 minutes. And then everyone like, you know, does have that like physical experience out in the world. You know, maybe it's in their home, maybe it's in their yard, maybe it's out wherever they are. And then everyone can like kind of come and reconnect and share. And like, so that online time is kind of like rethought and like more limited, and maybe just used for those like more important nuggets or moments of communication, to like, you know, make everyone still feel like they're coming together and like they know what to do and they have a place to share what they're doing. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because again, like the openness that CAPE supports and provides to like give space where, you know, we all can like actually, we could think of those things and we could try them. And then maybe even, you know, share like we are now about how that works out so that it can be possibly implemented in other places is just really great.
Yeah, it's, I think we was in a meeting with principals earlier this year. If, you know, if we're not going to experiment now and take chances and try different things that we've never tried before, when would you ever experiment? So yeah, I think that's a good call, Jessica. It's like we have to do this now. We have to re-see the scenario. So absolutely. We're getting close to 5:30. Does anybody else have any burning questions or thoughts? There's a lot of great comments already from this conversation on the chat bar, but does anybody have any other things they wanted to bring up to the group or questions?
I had a comment on someone's comment on the chat. RB was saying that teachers also have to be mindful of that they can also get overwhelmed too with what families are saying that they need or what parents want, and that's true as well. I'm teaching right now at CU, and so I'm kind of overwhelmed, like, how do I teach this design-based class that I do online? And I know that I don't get to interact with parents the way I do in my research, but it is something that I know teachers and educators are thinking a lot about. And one thing I think that's exciting that I've been seeing with CAPE, and something that we're planning to try soon, is like how to continue to cultivate the relationship between teachers and parents and the whole family. Because that's also a really great opportunity when you start to invite families and educators into a space or into an experience. There really is that opportunity for greater understanding and empathy. Because we're seeing, as part of the mismatch in what we're seeing in the interviews, is just like a mismatch of expectations. You know, there was a synchronous time where the kids were just socializing and the parents thought like, oh, they're just talking, like, what's that about? But from a teacher perspective, probably like, well, they just probably really need to connect and build that student community. You know, so I think there's also opportunities to really create stronger connections between the different adult caretakers in the child's life. And so I think that's what's exciting that I'm seeing in different programs, like these, like other projects here about how teachers and teaching artists are getting really involved with family learning.
Well said. Well said. Well, I think that's maybe a good place to leave it. Thank you all so much. Thank you all our presenters from all over the country and Chicago as well. Thank you for everybody who attended and all these great questions. We will post this a video of this meeting at the Cape Network Forum on Tumblr, and love to hear from you if you have any responses or feedback in general. And thank you all again. Have a great night. Bye-bye. Ciao.